Hey everybody, Qroo here. Today's video is directed to those folks who are putting a lot of time into learning Spanish but feel that they are not progressing as fast as they should be. And I think that we're all at that level at some point, all right? Well, over the years, I've helped countless people break out of that Spanish learning rut and start to see the results that they've been working so hard for. And if it makes you feel any better, it's not that they're, not intelligent or not putting in the time. It often just required them to make some small changes in the way they study and then use the language in conversations. You'll see what I mean when I go through the video. Let's jump right into the advice part, okay? Number one piece of advice is to simplify the language. That will make it easier for you to remember the material you've covered and actually use it correctly in conversations, right? Isn't that your goal, to be conversational in Spanish, fluent? Maybe you're throwing those terms around. That's what we're trying to get you to, folks, all right? Now, I'm not just going to leave you there and be like, oh, simplify the language, and you're like, oh, I have no idea how to do that, Paul. So here's some basic strategies to do just that. Learn vocabulary in chunks. Focus on learning small sets of words together. Examples would be sentence starters like en cuanto a, regarding, in reference to, a diferencia de, unlike, a juzgar por, judging by. This is going to allow you to create sentences much faster. Along the same lines of that is when you're learning your verbs, learn them with the appropriate preposition. Unless there's something like, comer, to eat. But if it's a verb that often appears with a preposition, include it on your word list. And the reason is that Spanish verbs do not always use the preposition you would expect. They also might change meaning based on the preposition used. That's why it's a good idea to learn verbs with the preposition. Examples would be pensar en, to think about something. Enamorarse de, to fall in love with something or someone. Because if you just learn enamorarse means to fall in love, then you might put con, with, right, instead of de. Next tip to simplify the language, learn simple grammatical patterns. I often call these plug-and-play phrases. One of the keys to learning Spanish quickly as an adult is to focus on patterns in the language. And usually I break them down into really small patterns, and then you can repeat those patterns. These are often grammatical constructions, and I explain them that way. I use grammatical terms, and I know that intimidates some of you, but it will really help you, okay? And the reason is that you can take this pattern and maybe substitute a particular word like it's a plug-and-play phrase, and then actually create a phrase that you may never have seen or heard in Spanish, but you're using deductive reasoning, right? I'm following the pattern. So what I'm creating is a grammatically correct sentence fragment or sentence. If you're interested in learning those types of grammatical patterns, just follow my channel because basically that's what I talk about all the time. Next tip is don't waste your time learning multiple ways to say the same thing. It's a waste of your study time. And it's actually going to slow you down when it comes time for conversation. I've seen it happen. It's happened to me. I'll know several ways to say something. I'm in my sentence and they all kind of flash in my head at once and I'm like, and it causes a delay. That's why I recommend choosing one particular way to say something and to just stick to it. Even if you know multiple ways to say it, just stick to using the same one every time in your own speech. For example, in my own speech, I use en cuanto a anytime I want to say regarding or in reference to. And I know many, many ways to say it, but I stick to en cuanto a because I like it. I mean, I could say con respecto a, acerca de, sobre, en lo que respecta a, referente a, relativo a, etc. But you're going to hear me in my videos, just keep saying en cuanto a. And the reason is that by sticking to the same one all the time, there's just less thought involved and I can speak more quickly, more fluently, all right? It really works, folks. All right, so those are some ways to simplify the language. Let's talk about your study habits, all right? Number one piece of advice here is to break up your study sessions. It's super easy to burn out when learning a language. If you're spending hours studying, but you're having difficulty retaining the material, you should consider breaking up your studying over the course of the day. This is what I always did, and it worked really well for me. I've mentioned this tip in other videos, and viewers have asked me, okay, what do you mean? Do you have some kind of sample routine, or how many minutes are you spending studying? What are you doing exactly? So this is the schedule that I typically recommend. It's very similar to what I did back in the day. In the morning, when I get up over breakfast or coffee, whatever, I spend about 15 to 20 minutes covering new material. It could be a set of sentence starters, it could be some verbs with the prepositions attached, something like that. but that's where my new material is coming in. After that, if you're feeling motivated, you want to continue, then I recommend reading online newspapers in Spanish or watching the news on YouTube in Spanish. Reading in Spanish, something other than just word lists and new vocabulary, is a great way to stay entertained and actually come across some constructions that you find useful. For example, let's say you're reading the online newspaper and you come across something like, deja mucho que desear, leaves a lot to be desired, and you're thinking, hey, that's pretty useful. That can get added to your new material list. So that's our morning. We're not too overwhelmed yet, right? Let's get into the afternoon, maybe at lunch or just after lunch. I recommend spending about 15 to 20 minutes reviewing that material from the morning or from some previous days that you may have trouble remembering. This is also a good time to practice what you've learned by creating your own sentences. Taking those sentence fragments, putting them in different orders, and trying to think, hey, how would I say this, for example? You can check your answers by popping them in online translators like DeepL, see if it comes up with something similar, or pop them into ChatGPT. Now, we're not done for the day. We have one more study session, and that is right before bed. I can tell you that I always retain things better if I look at them just before bed. I don't know if, it just runs through my head all night, what happens, but it works for me. So before you turn off the light and slip off into dreamland, look over all that material from the day, the phrases you've learned, different things you might have come up with while you're narrating your day. And again, this doesn't have to take very long. If you're using some flashcard method online, go through them pretty quickly. If you're old school like me and you're writing these things down, like the words on one side and definitions on the other, cover one side, run through them, see if you know them. That's it. If you still feel very motivated to want to do a little bit more Spanish before you go to sleep, I recommend getting a novel in Spanish and then reading a little bit of it each night, even if it's just a couple of pages. Now, I know if you're a beginner, that might sound like a daunting task, but it's not. Seriously, that really propelled my Spanish. Get a novel, something you're interested in. It can even be a translation of a novel you've already read, and kind of go through it. You may only read a paragraph each night, but it's gonna help your Spanish. So those are my study tips, folks, the time I think you should dedicate, but I'm gonna tell you right now, there will be days that you feel like spending a lot more time than that studying. Your brain's sharp, you're retaining it well, you're on fire, I mean, that's great, then put in that time. Take advantage of that. But on the days you're not feeling that way, you really have to make a self-promise to put in a minimum amount of time. Like, okay, I'm gonna do 15 minutes at breakfast, 15 minutes at lunch, and 15 minutes just before bed. I don't care if I'm tired, I worked all day, I'm sick, I'm gonna put in the time. It's important to keep those self-promises. Now let's get into tips for conversations, all right? This is super important as the studying aspect. Number one on our list is to stop translating the whole sentence into Spanish before speaking. And I know you're doing it because we all do it at some point. We don't want to make a mistake, we're putting everything in the order, we're thinking about it. If we go to say it, we've missed our opportunity. Conversations are time sensitive. You've got to keep this thing moving, all right? If you're thinking of the whole sentence before you say it, you're never going to be conversational, I promise you. And to illustrate my point, I'm going to try it in English. I'm thinking of the entire sentence before I say it. Already I'm noticing a huge delay. It doesn't work. Just to be clear here, I'm not saying that you have to think in Spanish. I know everybody tells you, okay, start thinking in Spanish and you'll speak it better. Like that's some switch in your head, okay? That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to start that way. I'm going to tell you that thinking in Spanish or whatever language you're trying to learn comes after many, many, many hours of listening to the language, using the language. You'll get there, all right? But you can be conversational and even fluent without having reached that level. The key to becoming conversational in Spanish is to always remember it's time sensitive, all right? And to start to think of the language as a series of little phrases that you're connecting like train cars. Well, since conversations are time sensitive, it is imperative that you at least get the locomotive moving, all right? We're gonna stick with this train analogy thing. Get the locomotive moving. That way the person knows you're going to say something. They're pausing so you can get that out. And this can be done with sentence starters, such as, ¿sabes qué? You know what? And at that point, with the locomotive out, you can slow down and start to think about attaching those train cars. ¿Sabes qué? Sí. Quiero ir a la playa mañana. You know what? Yes, I want to go to the beach tomorrow. Slow it down. I already talked about how much I like en cuanto a. I use this as a sentence starter all the time. En cuanto a lo que dijiste, about what you said, and then I can pause. Creo que, I believe that, and see, I can take another pause. My train's moving. I can slow my train down, add cars. I'm controlling this aspect of the conversation. Now, I assure you, this is probably easier than what you're already doing if you're trying to think of a whole sentence and spit it out. And with practice, this is going to become like second nature really, really quickly. You'll see what I mean. And as it does, you're going to find it much easier to engage in conversations and actually in longer conversations. I mean, you do it in English anyway. Don't you ever just start, hey, about that thing you said yesterday, I want to talk to you more about that. See, you controlled that. You didn't have to think of that in English. Do the same thing in Spanish, folks. Well, there you have it. That's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego. Okay, I want to address this. I end a lot of my videos that way, where I give you this stretched out hasta luego because I'm speaking English to you and I think it's kind of funny. But I got to tell you, I get tons of viewers, especially native speakers, who really latch onto that and give me advice to pronounce hasta luego better. I'm kidding around, folks. It's just like a little, tagline at the end. Hasta luego. It's not how I normally talk. I probably need a new tagline. I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for following the channel and watching the video. And, well, until next time. Bye-bye.